All right. We are joined on the first ever video version of Hudson Power Broker. We are joined by my colleague in the New York State Assembly from the 2nd Assembly District, Anthony Palumbo. How are you today, Anthony?
I'm well. Thanks for having me, Kieran.
You know, we're going to get to all the big topics and your fine idea to help businesses and New Yorkers through our legal system. But I Googled your name, and I know you. We've been pretty much every year, except for I think my first year in the Assembly. We've been in the Assembly together. But I Googled your name, Assemblyman Anthony Palumbo. And you know what the first thing that comes up is? This is awesome. I wish it was me. There's a timeline. It says 1992, Anthony Palumbo, all league, Patriot League at Lafayette College. Is that you? Are you that Anthony Palumbo?
That's me about 20 pounds ago, buddy.
Well, that's awesome. That's a no joke league. That's like West Point, Navy's in that league, right? Bucknell. That's the league you're in?
Yeah, Fordham. Yeah, Colgate, Lehigh. Yeah. Yep, Bucknell. That whole league. Yep.
That's Division I college baseball right there. What position do you play?
I was a shortstop. My first 3 years. In my third year, I hit a bunch of home runs as a junior. So moved to third base to see if maybe I get a shot at getting drafted. And unfortunately, I hit 2 home runs that year, of course, right?
Okay.
Try to bulk up and trying to hit home runs. And but yeah, I ended up third in the league and hitting too. I had a good year. But, you know, glory days, long time ago.
That is awesome. That is awesome, man. I was a high school baseball player. I'm still talking about that. If I was a Division I college all Patriot League, forget about it. That would be under here. It would say, and it wouldn't say my name. It would just say all league Patriot League, 1992.
Absolutely. You know, we should do it. We should dedicate like 3 shows to just that. You and I talk.
Glory days. We'll call it Glory Days for Kieran and Anthony. That would be great.
Oh, yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I'm actually reading the book Moneyball, which is kind of an older book now. It's 10 years old, but it's very interesting. It's about the 2002 draft and the Oakland A's and Billy Beane and all that. And it's kind of interesting about, you mentioned you were hoping to get drafted. I wonder if you would have had a better chance in the Moneyball era, because they looked at different things. They looked at on base percentage and they looked at different things than they looked at in the old days before Billy Beane revolutionized everything.
Yeah, right. But we had a handful of guys who were drafted from the different teams and summer teams that I played on, and some of them had horrendous college stats, but they had tremendous tools. You know, they're 6'4", 240, could throw 91, 92, not throw a strike, but they figure they can work with those guys. Back then, they only drafted guys that they thought had the potential to be big leaguers, not really good minor leaguers. So totally different animal now, though. You got that right. It's all algorithms and accounting, basically, to figure out stats and numbers.
Yeah, it really is. And they don't care. Like, their big thing was Billy Beane looked the part of the great baseball player coming up, but he wasn't. He didn't have it. And you know, even if you're a fat guy or a smaller guy, or you know, you didn't quite look right in the uniform, but if you had certain things, certain intangibles, the Oakland A's were willing to draft you and give you some money, and you had a shot at it. But that's awesome. Yeah, we should talk some more baseball one of these days. But let's talk about the big topic, which has dominated the news for the last 2 months, really, dominating every aspect of our life like nothing ever has in my 44 years on this planet. COVID-19, the virus, its impact on us in terms of health, and its impact on us as a country and as a globe in terms of the economy. And I saw you on another show with some high-profile big thinkers, and you had an idea to try to make things right for Americans and New Yorkers with regard to China's culpability in this whole mess. Tell us about it, Anthony Palumbo.
Yeah, sure. And this is, and as you know, obviously you're a lawyer as well. I'm an attorney. I'm a former prosecutor.
I mentioned your baseball background, but not your legal background. Sorry about that.
Yeah, right. And I, you know, in the past few weeks, as the investigation was revealing China's conduct, I came up with an idea, and you understand the landscape. The bottom line is, to start off the conversation, you can't sue China. You cannot. And we have, Missouri and Mississippi have filed lawsuits against the communist government of China. But that's not going to fly. I think the federal judges, the district judges are going to look through that. They're going to see through that as just an end around something called the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. You can't sue a foreign government in our courts. You do not have jurisdiction, period. It's only under very, very limited circumstances that you do. One of those circumstances is in the event some of their conduct is declared an act of terrorism. For example, under this JASTA, Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, that you may recall, it was actually during the Obama administration.
Yeah.
It was the only legislative override in his entire administration. It passed unanimously, both houses. He vetoed it. They brought it back up and they overrode him and passed it. So now, as we are currently in a lawsuit against Saudi Arabia for 9/11 because of their conduct, and we have decent relations with them. So my idea was, under the act of terrorism clauses in an insurance policy, if we make that declaration, all of our small businesses can recover. So this is about the ability for businesses to get $1 in their pocket to survive. And I had a press conference with a bunch of local businesses with me. Restaurant and Tavern Association down here in Suffolk County said that at least a third, probably half of their restaurants and taverns aren't even going to reopen. And now the beauty of this is it's a win-win for a number of reasons. One, it's controversial. It's offensive to say that China acted in a terrorist fashion, or that their conduct was a terrorist act, but they intentionally concealed this information. They silenced whistleblowers and doctors. So this is they affirmatively, I'm not saying they released it intentionally, but they intentionally concealed it. They closed down Wuhan. People weren't allowed to leave their buildings, yet they allowed people from Wuhan to not fly domestically in China, but still fly to the United States. And a week or so after they closed Wuhan, they still had, and when President Trump shut down flights from China, they protested. So that just shows you their level of culpability. And now the win-win aspect of it is, now businesses can recover under their insurance policies for an act of terrorism, but there is a fund that was created, the Terrorist Risk Insurance Fund, that has almost $1 trillion in it. It has over $900 billion sitting in it as we speak, that only can be accessed when there's an act of terrorism. So if the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary Mnuchin, declares this act as an act of terrorism, the floodgates open. Insurance carriers get reimbursed from that fund, and the Main Street businesses can immediately recover damages from their act of terrorism rider, because every business is supposed to be offered that. Since 9/11, every insurance company had to do it, and it's like $30 a year. So almost everyone takes it, as rare as it is. So if this is declared an act of terrorism, and it's somewhat of a difficult thing, so I'm sorry it's taking so long to explain, but
no, it's worth it. This is good stuff.
Yeah, and it's creative for sure, I think, but the nuance is a simple declaration of their conduct as a terrorist act. The carriers have to pay, and they won't go bankrupt, because there's almost $1 trillion that they will get reimbursed under this Terrorist Risk Insurance Fund for. And it's a win-win, and it's just money that's sitting there waiting to be accessed. We've been told over $900 billion with a B, because it's been funded by the carriers over the years since it was created by George Bush after 9/11. And in fact, it was reauthorized last year by President Trump. That act, the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, was reauthorized last year.
Wow. So as I was listening to you, and before you got into the explanation about the insurance fund, I was thinking, well, even if the declaration was made, the insurance companies would drag their clients in and the insureds into court and deny that it was a terrorist attack. But you're saying their incentive to do that is taken away by this insurance fund. So it seems like a no-brainer. You make the good point that it's a win-win for the insured and the insurer. Why do you think it hasn't been done yet, Anthony Palumbo?
Well, because it's impolite, I'm sure. Many people, when I did this, of course, there were many detractors and people running for office saying that it's grandstanding, that we need to do something for our businesses because they are getting crushed at this point. And the real wrinkle is, and what made me think about this, is under the business interruption insurance that most businesses have, they're not recovering. The insurance carriers are denying it because it doesn't include viruses.
Right.
Specifically, it usually involves not being able to physically access your building, like Hurricane Sandy down here, or some other acts of God that destroy the building. This isn't that type of a situation. So the carriers, I mean, they, of course, would be bearing a tremendous amount of losses if they did pay under those clauses. But as it stands now, they're not paying because it's an exception under that particular rider. It's a totally separate area of your contract, of your insurance contract and your insurance policy, the act of terrorism rider, which is not only, it's a clear distinction that a declaration needs to be made by the government But once it is, we're not declaring war on China. We're not doing it. We're not asking. It's not boots on the ground. It's simply a declaration internally in the United States that their conduct fits that section of the United States Code, which it does. I believe it's 18 USC 2331, where basically it's an act that causes that results in bodily harm or even just extensive property damage. And once the damage gets over 200 million, then the fund opens up. So, which we clearly are well above 200 million nationwide.
So is there any talk in Washington about this? Is anybody in the Treasury Department pushing for this, pushing Mnuchin to do it, or the Trump to give the order to do it? Has it reached that level yet?
Well, I don't believe so. I don't know. We sent a letter just the other day. We got it out on Monday. We're going to continue to follow up. And again, as I said, it may be a tough pill to swallow. And particularly, as I said, many of the local papers and elected, not even elected officials, people running for office who, had nothing better to do. They were really quite nasty about it, but saying, look, the bottom line is, I'm willing to listen to any other idea someone's got. I mean, there are some, Tom Cotton, for example, there are Senate and House candidates who have proposed legislation to change the Sovereign Immunities Act to allow us to sue China. That'll never happen legislatively. How long have you and I been doing this? We know it won't happen. I mean, that's really the bottom line. That, and I will bet you dollars to donuts, those lawsuits get dismissed because they're suing the government in power, just directly the Communist Party, is not going to fly. It's effectively suing China, which you cannot do unless you have this simple declaration.
Right. And you mentioned the Saudis and 9/11, and that took 17 years or 16 years after 9/11, and it took the override of a presidential veto to do it. So that is not a near-term solution, and these businesses are struggling to survive right now, and this would be an immediate fix if we were able to get it done. I think it's an idea worth exploring. A lot of times big ideas have unintended consequences. Are there any unintended consequences that, people who have seriously considered the idea have brought up? Maybe a bad precedent and this would be overused? Has anything like that been brought up?
Well, possibly, but I think from getting into the legal weeds a little bit, I mean, as a former prosecutor, I think about something like criminal negligence in New York State is the failure to perceive the risks of serious physical injury or death, that they either knew or should have known that concealing that information about a pandemic that began in their jurisdiction and geographically was isolated from China before it spread out like wildfire around the world, that disclosure would have been critical. There are some models and reports that say if we had known a week earlier, 40% of Americans, 40% less Americans would have been infected.
Wow.
So the unintended consequences are, I think, other than just the obvious ones, that it would probably infuriate China. I really could care less about what
that's a chance I'm willing to take.
Yeah. Who cares? I mean, they are doing what they can. They've been stealing our technology and doing all kinds of crazy stuff for years. They're not our friends. And this is something that can help Americans specifically. So, other than that, the fund is there and ripe for the taking. We just need to have access to it. And if they want to do that legislatively, that would be a great idea. That's more likely than allowing us to sue China, because they're certainly in the House that's led by the Democrats. I mean, the speaker was dancing in Chinatown in San Francisco after the declaration that we had positive coronavirus infected people in the U.S. So that's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Very good point. And if it will be a win for the United States and this president, the Speaker of the House is unlikely to do it. That's just the nasty political world that we live in. That is an interesting idea. You give a lot of food for thought. Definitely, at a very minimum, worth exploring at the federal level and to have as part of the conversation.